The prairie held its breath that evening, the wind brushing through the brittle grass like fingers over a prayer book. Long shadows stretched across the hills as the sun spilled gold over a world too tired to notice its own beauty. In a weather-beaten cabin stitched to the edge of the land, Elizabeth May bent over a pair of boots, scrubbing dried blood from cracked leather. Not her blood, not her husband's, though the boots had been his once. It belonged to a ranch hand hurt during a bar brawl, one who paid in empty thanks and left muddy footprints on her porch. Still, she cleaned them. It was the kind of thing Elizabeth did. Inside, supper simmered, a thin rabbit stew bolstered with potatoes and wild onion. Her daughter, Lottie, small and solemn, with eyes too wide for her face, tore pieces of bread with the careful hands of someone who'd learned how little there was to waste. Across from her, Eli, 11 and watchful, traced patterns on the table with a worn-down pencil stub. They didn't speak much, and Elizabeth didn't ask them to. Silence, after all, was its own sort of language. Outside, the clouds began to shift. Wind rose sudden and strange, curling through the air like something with teeth. Elizabeth stepped onto the porch, one hand braced against the wooden post, and squinted toward the horizon. There was a storm in the bones of the land. She felt it the way she sometimes felt her husband's absence, sudden and full of ache. She turned back toward the door just as the fence rattled. Wood groaned, hinges shrieked, and then a shadow stumbled into her yard. Not a man but a horse, riderless and wild-eyed, blood smeared across its flank. Elizabeth moved without thinking. Years of instinct, of grief-turned grit, took over. She caught the reins and whispered steady nonsense until the beast shuddered and stilled. Eli came running, boots unlaced, hair flying. "Ma," he panted. "Something's down by the creek." Her eyes narrowed. "What kind of something?" He hesitated, swallowed. "I think it's a man." Elizabeth grabbed her lantern. They found him half in the water, as if the land had tried to swallow him and failed. Blood soaked through his shirt, dark and too much. One leg bent wrong. Elizabeth knelt beside him, fingers on his throat. Still warm, still breathing. His face was streaked with mud and rain, lashes clumped together like a child's. He looked younger than he likely was. Elizabeth reached for his wrist, felt the flutter of life, and something inside her, something she thought dried out years ago, flickered. "He's going to die if we leave him," Eli whispered. "I know," Elizabeth said, and then more to herself than to him. "We're not leaving him." She dragged him, inch by inch, across the grass and up toward the cabin. Eli pushed from behind, teeth gritted. Lottie opened the door before they even called out. They laid him on the floor near the fire, and Elizabeth stripped away his wet clothes with hands more certain than her heart. Beneath the grime and grit, his body told stories. The deep ridge of an old bullet scar, the pale line across his ribs where some doctor's needle had sewn him shut. He was no common drifter. He was something else. But Elizabeth didn't ask. Not yet. She boiled water, pressed cloths to his wounds, fed him sips of broth with a spoon she once used to feed her husband in his dying weeks. The memory hovered like a ghost, but Elizabeth let it pass through her. Outside, the wind howled like it knew something she didn't. By midnight, the man was moaning, caught in some fever dream that twisted his words and tangled his limbs. He cried out once, raw and startled, then fell still again. Lottie curled up on the floor near his feet, her thumb tucked beneath her chin. Eli stood guard by the door with a carving knife and a heartbeat louder than thunder. Elizabeth didn't sleep. She sat beside him, eyes tracing the flicker of firelight across his face. He had a cut near his temple and a mouth made for secrets. She studied him the way one studies a storm from a distance, wary, unwilling to hope it'll pass harmless. In the darkest hours, before morning, he stirred. His eyes opened slow, foggy with pain. He looked at Elizabeth like he wasn't sure she was real. "You're safe," she murmured. "You're in my home. Don't try to speak." His lips moved anyway. A breath, a whisper. "Mercy." Elizabeth blinked. She thought of correcting him, telling him her name. But there was something in the way he said it, like a man drowning who thinks he's been pulled to shore. She let it be. "Rest now," she said, brushing damp hair from his forehead. We'll see what tomorrow brings. The fire crackled, and outside, the storm finally broke. Rain swept across the plains in long, sweeping sighs. The earth drank deep. Elizabeth sat with her back to the wall, watching the man breathe. Around her, the cabin settled into a kind of quiet not often known, not silence, but stillness. A beginning, maybe. The children slept. The stranger lived. And in the fragile space between thunder and dawn, something unnamed took root. It would be days before he gave her his real name, weeks before she gave him her trust. But the story had already started, not with a kiss or a gunshot, but with mud, rain, and the stubborn kindness of a woman who'd stopped waiting to be saved. Sometimes fate comes howling. Other times it limps across your fence line and bleeds on your floor. Elizabeth didn't know which kind this was. She only knew he was hers now, for a night, maybe longer, and that she had enough firewood to keep the cold at bay. For now. And sometimes, for now is all the prairie gives. The fever came hard the next morning, burning through the stranger's body like prairie fire. His skin flushed crimson, then went pale, then back again in waves that soaked the sheets Elizabeth laid beneath him. He tossed and mumbled, calling out names she didn't know, reliving battles she couldn't see. She kept a cold cloth on his brow and a basin near the bed. Every so often, Lottie would press a flower into his hand, soft petals against shaking fingers. The girl believed flowers helped folks stay tethered. Elizabeth didn't argue. He stayed unconscious for 2 full days. Elizabeth changed the bandages, spooned broth between clenched teeth, and hummed songs she half remembered from her own childhood. Her hands knew what to do. Her heart, less so. There was a stillness in the cabin now, but not peace. The kind of stillness you get before a thunderstorm breaks, quiet, tense, waiting. Eli watched from the shadows, flint in his gaze. "What if he's a killer?" the boy whispered once. Elizabeth glanced up, her voice steady. "Then he'll owe us something mighty deep when he wakes." The man didn't look like a killer, but he didn't look harmless either. Underneath the bruises and fever sweat, there was something sharp in him, like a blade hidden in linen. Elizabeth felt it without words. She didn't fear him, but she didn't trust him yet, either. Not fully. Still, she sat beside him every night, counting his breaths. On the 3rd evening, his eyes opened. They were gray. Not storm gray, ashes after a fire gray. Wary, hollowed. He stared at the ceiling along, while before turning his head, slow as molasses, toward Elizabeth. "You're all right," she said, as if those 3 words could steady a man lost in himself. His lips parted. A rasp. "Where?" "You're in my home," she answered gently. "You took a fall near my creek. Horse came limping in without you." A silence fell. He nodded faintly, eyes drifting closed again, and for a moment she thought he'd slip away once more. "But then, water," he whispered. She helped him drink. His fingers trembled as he took the tin cup from hers, and she saw then, this man was used to holding reins, maybe a gun, not being held. Over the next days, he said little, ate what she gave him, listened more than spoke. Eli kept his distance, always with a watchful eye, while Lottie took to sitting beside the stranger's cot, humming softly as she stitched together scraps of old fabric. The man would glance at her, sometimes with an expression Elizabeth couldn't quite place. Not fondness. Something older. Regret, maybe. Elizabeth didn't ask him who he was. She waited. One afternoon, when the sky broke open with a soft drizzle and the air smelled of wet earth, he sat up with effort and looked at Elizabeth straight. "You got a name?" "Elizabeth May." He nodded slowly, as if testing the shape of it in his mind. "Pretty name." "And you?" she asked quiet. He hesitated. "Too long." Then, "Don't reckon I remember." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. He looked down at his hands. "Least not one that fits anymore." She could have pushed. Didn't. She knew what it meant to leave behind a name that no longer served you. "You can rest a while longer," she said. "Don't need a name to be fed." That night, she found him outside on the porch, wrapped in a quilt, barefoot. The rain had stopped, and the sky was bruised with stars. He didn't turn as she stepped out beside him. "You should be lying down." "I spent too long lying," he murmured. needed to breathe air that ain't full of fire. She didn't ask what that meant. Instead, she poured him a tin cup of coffee. Strong, bitter, honest. He sipped, winced, then smiled, the first true smile she'd seen from him. Crooked. Real. "You're kind," he said after a moment. Elizabeth's laugh was low and brief. "No, just stubborn. Same thing where I come from." "Where's that?" He glanced toward the hills. "Far. Far's got a lot of hurt." He looked at her then, really looked. Not like a man studying a stranger, but like someone remembering the face of a woman who stayed. "It does," he said, "and sometimes you carry it longer than you should." They didn't speak after that. Just sat in the quiet, listening to the hush of wind through the cottonwoods. The next morning, Elizabeth found a child's carving knife under the stranger's pillow. She didn't ask how it got there. She simply took it, handed it back to Eli, and gave him that look mothers give, the one that says trust doesn't grow if you keep planting fear. Days passed. The man began helping, light things at first. Fetching water, brushing the mule, fixing a broken shutter with one hand braced against his side. He didn't speak much, but he listened. When Elizabeth sang softly to herself, he would stop whatever he was doing and just listen. It unnerved her at first. Then it didn't. One evening, while folding linens, Elizabeth paused. "You got a wife waiting somewhere?" He shook his head. "Children." A pause. Then no. Another silence. She waited. "Had a brother," he said. "Ran off before I got old enough to stop him." "You miss him?" "Miss who he was before the world made him mean." Elizabeth didn't reply. She understood that kind of missing, the kind that stays even when a body's gone. The next day, Sheriff Tully rode up. Dusty and round-shouldered, Tully wore the badge like it burned his chest. He tipped his hat and glanced at the stranger, who stood still as stone by the porch post. "Heard a fella came limpin' into your land last week." Elizabeth crossed her arms. "We get strays now and then." "This one might be Calderstock," Tully muttered. "Big family. Rich sort. Trouble follows them like hounds." She looked him straight on. "Don't know his name. Don't reckon he's causing us trouble." Tully studied her, then the man, then back again. "Well, if you remember anything, I'll be sure to forget." After the sheriff left, the man leaned against the doorframe, breathing shallow. "You should have told him. I'm not in the habit of giving up folks just because they're wounded. I'm not who you think I am." She looked at him long. "Then tell me who you are." He swallowed. "Name's Wes. Wesley Calder." She didn't blink, just nodded once. "All right then, Wes," she said, turning back toward the stew pot. "You can peel these potatoes." He stepped forward, took the peeler in his hand. Not a word spoken between them as the fire crackled. The children played beneath the eaves, and the name Wes Calder hung in the air like smoke, neither curse nor salvation, just truth bare and quiet. And in the hush of that moment, Elizabeth understood something deep in her bones. He hadn't lied out of fear. He'd lied because no one had ever wanted the man beneath the name. Until now. The prairie shifted with the season, softening from the brittle gold of late summer into something cooler, quieter. The air turned sharp at dusk, and the mornings came laced with frost. Elizabeth noticed the way the mule's breath fogged in the early light, the way the porch boards creaked deeper now under weight. The land, like the heart, had seasons, and hers, long-wintered, was beginning to thaw. Wes never said much, but he did more than most. He rose early, even when his leg ached, and mended things without being asked. The barn door hung straighter now. The fence stopped groaning when the wind blew. He taught Eli to splice rope and fix a saddle's broken rigging, his voice patient and low, never commanding. Elizabeth watched them from the kitchen window once, and her hands stilled on the dough. Not because of anything grand, just the sound of her son laughing again. Lottie followed Wes like a shadow, small feet quiet as her questions were bold. He never ignored her, not once. When she asked why his hands were scarred, he told her he once tried to fix something too big for him. When she brought him a wild daisy, he tucked it behind his ear and wore it through supper. Elizabeth couldn't remember the last time someone had made her daughter feel that scene. One afternoon, Elizabeth found Wes standing in the field, staring out over the hills like he was listening to something only he could hear. She brought him water, and when he took the cup, their fingers brushed. It was nothing, and it was everything. His eyes met hers, not sharp or hungry, just steady, warm, like someone building a fire, not setting one. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked, watching the wind ripple the grass. "Often," Elizabeth said, "but the land always finds a way to hold me." He nodded. "Sometimes staying takes more courage." She didn't answer, but that night she found herself sitting a little closer to him by the fire. He told stories in pieces. A father who'd been cruel with expectations. A brother who vanished into whiskey and rail tracks. Money that came too easy and cost too much. He spoke of cities that stank of iron and ambition, and of the silence that money couldn't buy. And then he stopped. "You don't have to say more," she said, reaching for another log. But he did, days later. Told her he'd been meant to marry someone for business, not love. Told her he'd left before his name could chain him forever. That he hadn't been running from justice, only from a life that didn't feel like his own. Elizabeth didn't flinch. "You're not the only one who's been punished for trying to be more than what the world expects." There was a stillness in his eyes when she said that. Not sorrow, not yearning, just quiet understanding, as if he'd spent his life in rooms where people only spoke to the version of him they wanted. Elizabeth didn't want a version, just the truth. But truth doesn't keep others from prying. It was near the end of the month when Sheriff Tully returned, not alone this time. He came with a banker and a man in a wool coat too fine for dust. They waited on the porch while Elizabeth stood tall in the doorway, Lottie clinging to her skirt. "Afternoon, ma'am," said the banker, all smiles with eyes like nails. "We understand you're hosting a guest." "This is my land," Elizabeth said, her voice quiet steel. "Who I host is my business." Wes stepped out beside her. No coat, sleeves rolled, dirt on his hands from digging fence posts. He looked nothing like the man they remembered or expected. The man in the wool coat stiffened. "Wesley," he said, sharp with familiarity, "you've caused quite a stir. Your father's been looking." "I'm not going back," Wes interrupted. "Not to him. Not to any of it." "You're engaged," the man insisted. "Arrangements made. Property tied." Elizabeth didn't move, but she felt the chill of those words like winter come early. "I broke those ties," Wes said softer now. "There's nothing left for me in that name." Sheriff Tully cleared his throat. "There's rumors, Elizabeth, that you're harboring a man with claims on a fortune. Folks think you're taking advantage." The fire lit in her then, slow and righteous. "You think I nursed a man through fever for a cut of his legacy?" Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "You think I'd drag a stranger from the dirt just to gain his favor? Get off my porch." The banker adjusted his hat. "We'll be back. With documents. Claims." They left without another word. Elizabeth sat on the steps once they were gone. Wes joined her, silence between them thick as smoke. After a while he said, "If staying puts you in danger." She cut him off with a look. "You leaving wouldn't protect me." It had just proved him right. He didn't argue, just reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny horseshoe charm, dull with age. "My mother gave me this. Said it was for safe travels." Never believed it, really. He set it beside her. "But maybe it's time it stayed somewhere that feels like home." Her throat tightened. "Why are you really here, Wes?" His gaze didn't waver. "Because this is the first place I've been seen as a man, not a mistake." That night, they didn't speak much. Just shared bread and silence, and something in the air between them shifted. Not like lightning, more like a tide, slow and certain. The next day, Elizabeth found a patch of violets blooming by the fence. She'd never planted them. She picked a few and placed them on the table. When Wes saw them, his smile came soft and slow, and something inside her answered. What the town forgot to see was this: a woman's worth not measured by what she'd lost, but by what she'd still choose to give. A man's value not tied to his name, but to how he carried the weight of it. And children whose quiet joy returned not from riches, but from watching their mother laugh again. They didn't say they loved each other. Not yet. But Lottie began calling him Mr. Wes, and Eli no longer kept the knife beneath his pillow. In a place where nothing much changed, something precious had begun to. And the wind, as it blew over the plains, carried the scent of hope dressed in dust and wild violets. The morning came like a held breath, sky pale with promise, the wind still and listening. Elizabeth stepped outside with her coffee in hand, her shawl pulled tight against the bite of early autumn. The world looked almost ordinary, but something had shifted beneath the soil of things. She felt it, in the stillness of the porch boards, in the hush between the trees. Inside, Wes was helping Lottie button the back of her dress. His hands moved carefully, not fast, not fumbling, reverent, as if even the smallest act deserved care. Eli watched from the corner, arms crossed, but his eyes soft. There was a steadiness to their rhythm now, the kind born not from habit, but from quiet choosing. Wes had begun fixing not just fences, but the cracks in their small, worn world. Then the rider came. A black horse, sleek and fast, with a telegram in hand and a look that said the message was heavier than the paper it rode on. Elizabeth didn't open it at first, just held it, the weight of it burning in her palm. Wes stood beside her, without speaking. She read it once, then again. "You've been summoned," she said, the words ash in her mouth. "Your family's asking for you in Stockton. There's a wedding waiting. Yours." Wes didn't move. His face held no surprise, only a quiet resignation, like someone who'd known winter would come, but had hoped for one more warm day. "Arranged years ago," he murmured, "before I ever learned what wanting meant." "And you didn't think to tell me?" Her voice stayed low, but each word cut deeper than the last. "You came into my home with half the world chasing your name, and I let you stay." "I let you," she couldn't finish. "I wasn't lying to you," he said. "I just wasn't ready to say it out loud." She turned from him, arms folded tight across her chest. "Well, say it now." "I walked away from it," he said. "All of it. The name, the fortune, the chains dressed up as duty. I thought if I got far enough from it, it would stop following me. I never meant to bring it here." Elizabeth's voice cracked like brittle glass. "You didn't bring it here, Wes. You planted it." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw grief in him that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with what might be lost. That night, the children were quiet at supper. Even Lottie left her stew unfinished. Wes sat with his hands folded, not eating, not leaving, just waiting. After the children had gone to bed, Elizabeth found him out by the barn. A soft wind stirred the dust around his boots. He held a small wooden box in his hands. "I was saving this," he said without looking up. "Not for the perfect moment, but for the honest one." He opened the box. Inside, nestled in cloth, was a simple silver ring, not polished, not grand. Just real, solid, meant to last. Elizabeth stared. "I don't want to marry someone I've never loved," he said. "I want to marry the woman who saved my life before she even knew my name." She didn't reach for the ring. "I've got 2 children," she whispered. "A past no man's ever wanted to hold. And I won't be someone's rebellion. I won't be a way to run from your world." "You're not my way out," Wes said. "You're my way home." Silence stretched between them. Stars blinked overhead like they too were waiting. "I can't promise you ease," she said. "Not even peace." "I'm not asking for ease," he replied. "I'm asking for you." She closed the box slowly, handed it back. "Ask again tomorrow." He nodded once, then turned toward the cabin. By morning, the town had caught wind. Miss Helen at the mercantile raised an eyebrow so sharp it could slice bread. The blacksmith's wife whispered behind her apron. There were rumors Elizabeth had trapped Calder, used her pity to bind him, that she'd tricked him with children and sorrow. Elizabeth did not defend herself. She never had. Wes went into town that day alone, returned with a saddlebag full of food and a set to his jaw that Elizabeth didn't recognize. "Word travels faster than truth," he said, "but I don't much care what they say." Later, she found him on his knees in the small patch of earth near the porch, planting bulbs for spring. "What if we're not here come spring?" she asked softly. He pressed the dirt down, gentle as prayer. Then the next folks will have beauty waiting. That evening, just as the sun dipped low and gold poured through the cottonwoods, Wes stepped inside wearing his only clean shirt and boots polished with river mud. Eli stood behind him, shoulders squared. "We're ready," Wes said. Elizabeth blinked. "Ready for what?" "For you to say yes." She looked to Eli, who held something small in his hand. It was the wooden box. He offered it without words. Lottie tugged at Elizabeth's skirt. "He made us promise not to tell you. Said if he's asking you proper, we all had to stand behind it." Elizabeth swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "Do you love him, Mama?" Lottie asked. And in that moment, all the reasons to run, all the walls she'd built, all the frost that had shielded her heart, melted. "Yes," she said, "I do." They married in the chapel at the edge of town, with no organ, no lace. Just wildflowers gathered from the fields and children who didn't stop smiling. Wes spoke his vows like a man setting roots. Elizabeth's hands shook, but her voice never did. When he placed the ring on her finger, the world stilled. The next day, the banker returned, again, but Wes met him with papers in hand. Signed, sealed, final. Wesley Calder's fortune now belonged to the family he'd left behind. The land, the mines, the obligations, all gone. "I've chosen what's worth keeping," Wes said simply. The banker left with more dust on his coat than he'd arrived with. That night, Elizabeth stood alone on the porch, watching the sky burn itself into twilight. Wes came to stand beside her. "You sure?" she asked, voice barely above a breath. "Sure as rain," he said, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I didn't lose anything I wanted to keep." Inside, laughter danced through the windows. A fire crackled. Children called for stories. Elizabeth turned to him, heart full. "Come on in, husband." He smiled, slow and real. And the door shut behind them, not to keep the world out, but to hold the warmth in. The storm broke just before midnight, sudden and wild, as if the sky had finally grown tired of holding its sorrow. Rain slammed against the windows in hard, angry bursts. Thunder rolled through the valley like distant drums, and the wind tore at the shutters with a fury that felt personal. Inside the cabin, the fire hissed and flickered. Elizabeth stood near it, arms folded, watching the shadows dance across the floorboards. Wes sat at the table, his face drawn tight, shoulders squared with the weight of something unsaid. The children were asleep in the loft, their breathing soft and even, unaware of what had come knocking. A rider had arrived not long before, soaked to the bone and short on breath. The telegram he brought had only 6 words, but Elizabeth could feel them still ringing in her chest. "Calder Holdings claims the widow's land." She had read it once, then lowered the paper with shaking hands. Wes had taken it from her, read it twice, and said nothing at all. Now, hours later, the silence between them sat heavy as wet wool. "They found a way," she said finally. "Your name, it's still tied to them, isn't it?" Wes nodded slowly. "I thought it was done, but they've got lawyers like wolves. They'll say anything once touched by Calder belongs to Calder." "This land was never theirs," she said. "It was my father's. It was my husband's. It's my children's now. And I'll make sure it stays that way," he said, rising to his feet. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "I swear it, Elizabeth. I'll end this." She took a step toward him, voice tight with fear. "How?" "They've got men and money and maps drawn in ink that erases women like me." He took her hands, calloused and warm, and placed something into her palm, a folded letter, the seal already broken. Her name was scrawled across the top. "What is this?" "My resignation," he said. "I signed away the last of it 2 weeks ago. Walked into their office, said I'd give up the rights, the money, the name itself if they left you out of it. They laughed. And then, I told them I'd testify," he said, a grim smile rising. "I told them I'd tell the world what they've done to folks like you, and folks like me. Every bribe, every buried deed. I may not have their power, but I've got their secrets." Elizabeth stared at him, her heart loud in her ears. "You gave them everything." "I already had everything," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It sleeps in that loft and keeps flowers in her apron." Lightning cracked, close now, and the lights flickered. The storm pressed harder, but the cabin stood steady. A knock sounded at the door. Elizabeth flinched. Wes moved first, pulling the door open against the wind. Sheriff Tully stood there, soaked and scowling, with a stack of papers clutched beneath his coat. "Got word from Stockton," he said. "Lawyer types making a mess of things. You filed that Calder renunciation proper." "I did," Wes said. "Then they can't touch this land," Tully said, stepping inside. "Not unless someone inside your house gave them reason to think it belonged to the Calder name. You didn't sign anything else, did you?" "No," Wes said. Elizabeth turned cold. "But I did." They both looked at her. She moved slowly to the shelf, pulling out a folded sheet of parchment. "Before the wedding, the banker gave me a paper. Said it was to verify my claim for protection," he said. "I didn't understand it all. I just signed." Wes took the paper, eyes scanning the fine print. His jaw clenched. "It's a transfer of holding. They used you to pull the land under the Calder umbrella. You didn't give it away. You just opened the door." "I thought I was securing our home," Elizabeth whispered, throat tight. "You were," Wes said gently. "And we still will." He turned to Tully. "Will you testify to the forgery, if needed?" Tully sighed. "Won't make me popular, but yeah." "Then let them come," Wes said. "I'll meet them in court or on their porch, whichever they choose." Elizabeth's breath caught, and a sharp, unexpected laugh escaped her. "You're threatening the Calder dynasty with a mule and a wood stove." "I'm threatening them with truth," he said. "Turns out it's the one thing they can't buy." That night, after the sheriff left, they didn't sleep. The storm battered the world outside, but inside, Wes lay beside her on the floor, fingers twined with hers, backs pressed to the warm hearth. He spoke low, almost to himself. "They made me believe I had to be cruel to survive. You unmade that." "You didn't need me to be good," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "But I needed you to believe I could be." The next morning, the sun rose clear and strong, as if it, too, had survived something. Elizabeth stepped onto the porch and saw the trail of muddy hoofprints leading away from the cabin. No riders returned. No officials knocked. Word had gotten out. Maybe the letter Wes wrote. Maybe Tully's talk with the judge. Maybe just the weight of too much truth finally tilting the scale. Either way, the threat faded like fog under light. Weeks passed. The children grew louder, laughter curling through the halls like music. Wes built a new fence with Eli, teaching him to use his strength with care. Lottie planted marigolds in coffee tins. And Elizabeth, for the first time in years, began to sleep without fear at the door. One evening, long after the last of the storm's memory had blown east, Elizabeth found Wes beneath the cottonwood tree, carving something into the trunk. She touched his shoulder. "What are you doing?" "Making something last," he said, stepping aside. There, etched into the bark, were their initials. Not bold, not grand, just simple letters, joined by a line and a date. "No name," she teased. He looked at her, eyes full. "Your name's the only one I want to carry." She kissed him there, beneath the cottonwood, as the sun bled gold across the grass and the wind stirred gentle through the leaves. And the vow they'd spoken, in a chapel with no music, in a home built on mercy, held. Because, in a world that tried to take everything from them, they had given everything to each other. Not for show, not for safety, but because they had both been broken and still chose to build. Sometimes storms come to break what's weak. Other times, they come to prove what holds. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they clear the sky so love can bloom wild and true.